She had always been the kind of girl people looked past without meaning to. Not because she did anything wrong, and not because she wasn't kind or polite. It was simply because she stayed quiet. In a world where the loudest voices filled the room, she chose to sit near the window and watch. She lived in a small house at the edge of town. The paint on the walls had started to fade, and the front gate made a soft creaking sound every time someone pushed it open. The house was not fancy, but it was full of small signs of care. Clean curtains, folded blankets, a tiny row of plants her mother watered every evening before sunset. From the outside, her life looked simple. She went to school every morning with her bag resting carefully on her shoulder. She listened more than she spoke. When the teacher asked questions, she often knew the answers, but she hesitated just long enough for someone else to speak first. After school, she walked home instead of staying behind to talk in the schoolyard. No one waited for her at the gate. No group called her name. Most of her classmates had strong personalities. Some were funny. Some were confident. Some were known for sports. Others were known for getting into trouble. She was known for nothing in particular. If someone were asked to describe her, they would pause and say, "Oh, she's quiet." That was all. But quiet did not mean empty. Inside her heart lived something steady and alive. A love that had grown slowly, quietly, the way a small seed grows under the soil before anyone sees green leaves above the ground. That love was music. In the corner of their living room stood an old upright piano. It had belonged to her grandfather many years ago. The wood was scratched in places, and one of the keys stuck if pressed too hard. It had not been tuned in a long time, but it still held its voice. To most people, it looked like a heavy piece of old furniture that took up too much space. To her, it felt like a doorway. When she was younger, she used to sit beside her grandfather while he played. His fingers moved slowly but confidently, and the room would fill with soft melodies. She did not understand the notes or the names of the songs back then. She only understood the feeling that the world became calmer when the music started. After he passed away, the piano remained silent for a long time. Dust gathered on top of it. People stopped noticing it. But she noticed. One afternoon, when the house was especially quiet, she walked toward it and gently lifted the cover. She pressed one key. The sound surprised her. It was not perfect, but it was real. She pressed another, and another. The notes did not make sense together, yet something about them made her chest feel warm. From that day on, she returned to the piano whenever she could. There were no lessons, no teacher, no music books stacked neatly beside her. She learned by listening. Sometimes she would hear a song on the radio and try to find its sound on the keys. At first it was messy. She would press the wrong notes and stop, frustrated. But she did not quit. She tried again, and again. At school, when other students talked about sports practice or dance classes, she stayed silent about what she did at home. Once, during a class activity, the teacher asked everyone to share a hobby. When her turn came, she softly said, "I play the piano." A few students turned to look at her. One raised an eyebrow in surprise. Another gave a small laugh, not in a cruel way, but in disbelief. "You?" someone whispered. She nodded but did not explain further. The moment passed quickly. The teacher smiled politely and moved on to the next student. By the end of the day, no one remembered what she had said. But she remembered. That evening, when she sat at the piano, the memory of that whisper echoed in her mind. "You?" She pressed the keys harder than usual. The sound came out stronger, fuller. She did not know how to explain it, but when she played, she felt seen, even if no one was watching. Her mother often worked late. Some nights, she came home tired, her steps slow but steady. She never complained. She would place her bag down, wash her hands, and ask about school with a gentle smile. The girl always answered, "It was fine." She never mentioned the laughter or the way people overlooked her. One night, while her mother was sitting at the small kitchen table, she heard the piano begin to play. At first, it was soft and uncertain. Then it grew smoother. The notes floated through the house like a quiet conversation. Her mother stood still, listening. She walked slowly toward the living room and leaned against the wall. She did not interrupt. She simply watched her daughter's fingers move carefully across the keys. When the song ended, the girl looked up, slightly embarrassed. She had not realized someone was listening. "That was beautiful," her mother said softly. The girl shrugged. "It's not that good." Her mother shook her head. "It doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful." Those words stayed with her. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Her practice became a routine. After homework, after dinner, sometimes even before school, when the sky was still pale and quiet. The neighbors occasionally heard the music through the thin walls. Some thought it was just background noise. Others didn't notice at all. School, nothing changed. She was still the quiet girl near the window. When group projects were assigned, she was often given the smallest role. When teams were picked in sports, she was usually last. Not because she wasn't capable, but because she wasn't loud enough to be remembered first. One afternoon, during a school assembly, a few students performed on stage. There was singing, dancing, even a short comedy act. The crowd clapped and cheered. She watched from her seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. For a brief moment, she imagined herself walking up to a piano placed at the center of that stage. She imagined pressing the keys and letting the sound travel across the hall. But just as quickly, the thought faded. No one would expect that from her. No one would even suggest it. She told herself it didn't matter. Yet every evening, she returned to the piano with more determination than before. If the world did not see her, that was fine. The piano did. The music responded to her touch. When she was sad, the notes felt heavier. When she felt hopeful, the melody lifted. Sometimes she closed her eyes while playing. In those moments, she was not the quiet girl from school. She was someone brave, someone strong, someone who had something worth hearing. Her fingers began to move more confidently. She started creating her own small melodies, simple but filled with feeling. She did not know the proper names for the chords she played. She did not understand technical terms. She only understood how it felt when a sequence of notes made her heart beat faster. Late one evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows, she played a melody she had been working on for weeks. It was slow and emotional. She imagined it as a conversation between her and her mother, a way of saying thank you without using words. When she finished, the house felt different. Quieter, but in a good way. She looked down at her hands and realized they were no longer trembling the way they used to when she first began. No one at school had noticed her progress. No one had asked her to play. To them, she was still just the quiet girl who rarely spoke. But something was changing. Not outside. Inside. She no longer practiced to prove anything to her classmates. She no longer replayed their whispers in her mind. Instead, she focused on the sound, the feeling, the small spark inside her chest that grew brighter with every note. She did not know what the future would bring. She did not know if she would ever play on a big stage or in front of a large audience. All she knew was that when she sat at that old piano, she felt whole. And even if no one else considered her seriously, the music did. And that was enough for now. Life did not suddenly become easier after she discovered how much music meant to her. In many ways, it became more complicated. The more she loved the piano, the more she noticed how far away her dreams seemed. Money was always tight in their home. Her mother worked long hours, sometimes leaving before sunrise and returning after dark. Some days she looked so tired that even smiling seemed like hard work. But she still smiled. She still asked about school. She still made sure there was food on the table, even if it was simple. The girl understood more than her mother realized. She saw the unpaid bills stacked neatly in one corner. She noticed how her mother checked price tags carefully at the market. She heard the quiet sighs late at night when the house was finally still. Because of this, she never asked for anything extra. No new clothes unless it was necessary. No school trips that cost too much. And definitely no piano lessons. She knew lessons were expensive. She had once searched online at the public library after school, just to see. The numbers on the screen made her stomach drop. Even 1 month of proper classes would cost more than what her mother spent on groceries for weeks. She closed the browser quickly, as if it were something she was not supposed to look at. So she continued teaching herself. She listened carefully to every piece of music she could find. Sometimes it was an old recording on the radio. Sometimes it was a short video she watched quietly with headphones at the library. She paid attention to patterns. She noticed how certain notes followed others. She tried to memorize the way melodies rose and fell. At home, she repeated those sounds on the old piano. The instrument was not perfect. Some keys were slightly off. One made a faint clicking sound. But she adjusted. She learned which keys needed a softer touch. She learned how to press gently so the sound would not feel too harsh. Progress came slowly, but it came. At school, however, things felt different. One afternoon during lunch, a group of classmates were talking about hobbies. One girl proudly showed pictures of her dance competition. Another talked about football practice. Then someone mentioned a music academy in town, where children performed in neat uniforms under bright lights. The girl listened quietly while eating her simple lunch. When someone asked if anyone else did something interesting after school, there was a short pause. For a second, she thought about speaking up again. "I play the piano," she almost said. But the memory of that earlier whisper stopped her. "You?" Instead, she kept her eyes on her plate. A boy nearby laughed and said, "I tried piano once. It's too hard. You need real talent for that." The group nodded in agreement. She felt something tighten in her chest. Not anger, not sadness exactly, just a reminder. People believe talent was something you were either born with or not. They did not talk about practice. They did not talk about long nights repeating the same section again and again until your fingers hurt. When she got home that day, she did not go straight to the piano. She sat on her bed and stared at her hands. They looked small, ordinary, not like the hands of someone special. Maybe they were right, she thought. Maybe this was just a hobby. Maybe she was pretending. The doubt stayed with her through dinner. It followed her while she washed the dishes. It sat beside her when she opened her school books. Finally, late at night, she stood up and walked toward the piano. She did not turn on the bright lights. She let the room stay dim. She placed her fingers on the keys but did not press them right away. "What if they're right?" she whispered to herself. Then she played. The first few notes sounded uncertain, just like she felt. But as she continued, something changed. Her fingers began to move out of habit. They remembered what her mind questioned. The melody flowed softly through the room. She closed her eyes. In that moment there was no school, no lunch table, no whispered doubts. There was only sound. When she finished, the doubt had not completely disappeared, but it had become smaller. The music had answered her in a way words never could. Days later, a relative came to visit. The house felt slightly more crowded than usual. There was laughter in the living room and the smell of tea in the air. At some point, the conversation turned toward the future. "What does she want to become?" the relative asked, nodding toward the girl. Her mother smiled gently. "She loves music." The relative looked surprised. "Music? That's nice as a hobby. But she should think about something stable. Something secure." The girl stood frozen near the doorway, listening. "Music is uncertain," the relative continued. "Very few people succeed. It's better to focus on studies." Her mother did not argue. She simply nodded politely. The girl felt her face grow warm. She wanted to explain that she did focus on studies. She wanted to say that loving music did not mean being careless about life. But the words stayed inside her. Later that evening, when the relative had left and the house was quiet again, her mother found her sitting silently at the piano without playing. "Why aren't you practicing?" her mother asked gently. The girl hesitated. "Do you think it's useless?" Her mother frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "Music. Do you think it's just a hobby? Something that doesn't matter?" Her mother walked closer and sat beside her on the small bench. For a moment, she did not answer. She looked at the piano keys instead. "When you play," her mother said slowly, "this house feels different, lighter, even on the hardest days. That matters. But what about the future? The girl asked. The future is built step by step, her mother replied. No one knows where it leads. What matters is whether your heart feels alive while you walk. The girl swallowed. But what if I'm not good enough? Her mother turned to face her fully. Good enough for who? The question surprised her. People will always have opinions, her mother continued. Some will believe in you, some won't. But you have to decide whose voice is louder. That night, she practiced longer than usual. Still, the outside world did not change overnight. At school, a music competition poster was placed on the notice board. Students gathered around it, excited. The competition was open to anyone who wanted to perform. She stood at the back of the crowd, reading the details carefully. Her heart beat a little faster. For a brief second, she imagined writing her name on the list. Then she noticed two students whispering nearby. Only serious performers should join, one said. Not someone who just plays around at home. She stepped back quietly. The next day, she passed the notice board again. Several names were already written down. None of them were hers. That afternoon, while walking home, she felt heavier than usual. It was not that anyone had directly told her she could not join. It was the feeling that she did not belong in that space. As if the stage was reserved for people who were already seen as talented. When she entered the house, her mother was not home yet. The silence felt deeper than usual. She walked to the piano and opened it slowly. Instead of playing something she already knew, she began experimenting. She pressed keys she had never combined before. Some sounded strange. Some clashed. But then, suddenly, a new melody appeared. It was different from anything she had played before. Softer but stronger in its own way. She repeated it again and again until it felt natural. This time, she was not copying something she had heard. She was creating something that belonged only to her. As the days passed, she returned to that melody often. She adjusted it, added small changes, made it smoother. It felt personal, like a quiet conversation with herself. At school, she remained the same quiet student. People still overlooked her. Group projects still placed her in the background. But inside, something steady was growing. She began to understand that being unnoticed did not mean being unimportant. It simply meant her moment had not arrived yet. And maybe that was okay. Because while others were busy being seen, she was busy becoming better. Every night, the old piano filled the small house with sound. Not perfect sound. Not professional sound. But honest sound. She still had doubts. She still wondered if she would ever be taken seriously. But now, those doubts did not stop her hands from moving. They simply reminded her how much she cared. And somewhere deep inside, even though no one else noticed yet, she was preparing for something bigger than she could imagine. The change came quietly, the way most serious things do. There was no warning, no dramatic moment that clearly divided life into before and after. It started with small signs. Her mother coming home more tired than usual. Skipping dinner and saying she wasn't hungry. Sitting down just for a minute and falling asleep in the chair. At first, the girl thought it was only stress. Work had always been demanding. Long hours, standing all day, dealing with people who rarely noticed her effort. But this felt different. Her mother's smile was still there, but it took more effort to appear. Her voice was softer, as if it carried extra weight. One evening, while washing dishes, her mother paused and held the edge of the sink for support. It lasted only a second, but the girl saw it. "Are you okay?" she asked quickly. "I'm fine," her mother replied too quickly. "Just a little tired." But the tiredness did not go away. A week later, her mother had to leave work early. Then she missed a day. Then another. Doctor visits began quietly. Short appointments at first. Then longer ones. Words like tests and results were mentioned in low voices behind partially closed doors. The girl did not fully understand everything, but she understood enough. Something was wrong. The house changed. The air felt heavier. The small routines that once felt normal now felt fragile. Her mother tried to act the same. She still asked about school. She still reminded her to finish homework. But sometimes, in the middle of a sentence, she would lose focus, staring at nothing for a few seconds before returning to the conversation. At night, the girl lay awake longer than usual. She listened to the quiet sounds of the house, the ticking clock, the soft hum of the refrigerator, and sometimes her mother coughing in the next room. Fear crept in slowly, not loud, not dramatic, just steady and cold. One afternoon, after returning from another doctor visit, her mother sat at the kitchen table with a calm expression that did not reach her eyes. "It's nothing to panic about," she said gently. "I just need rest. And maybe some treatment." The word treatment echoed in the girl's mind. "Will you be okay?" she asked, her voice small. Her mother reached across the table and held her hand. "I plan to be." The girl nodded, but her chest felt tight. From that day on, she noticed every small detail. How slowly her mother walked up the stairs. How she pressed her hand against her side when she thought no one was looking. How she avoided looking at the stack of unpaid bills growing slightly taller. School became harder to focus on. Teachers spoke. Classmates laughed. But her thoughts were somewhere else. During math lessons, she found herself staring at numbers without understanding them. During lunch, she barely tasted her food. One day, a classmate complained loudly about not getting the newest phone model. The group around them nodded in agreement, discussing features and colors. She listened silently and felt something shift inside her. Their worries felt so far from hers. That evening, she went straight to the piano. She didn't turn on the lights. She sat in the dim room and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment, she couldn't play. Her hands trembled. What if? The thought stopped halfway. She pressed one key, then another. The melody that came out was different from anything she had played before. It wasn't something she had practiced. It wasn't copied from anywhere. It came straight from the tightness in her chest. The notes were slower, deeper. They carried a weight she had never felt before. Each sound felt like a word she couldn't say out loud. Tears slid down her face quietly, but she didn't stop playing. In that moment, the piano was not just an instrument. It was the only place where her fear could exist safely. The only place where she didn't have to pretend to be strong. Her mother, resting in the next room, heard the music. She closed her eyes and listened. Even through her exhaustion, she felt it. The emotion, the honesty. When the girl finished, she wiped her face quickly and stood up, embarrassed by her own tears. But her mother called out softly, "Can you play that again?" She hesitated. "It wasn't very good." "It was," her mother replied. "It felt real." The girl sat down again and played the melody once more, this time with slightly steadier hands. After that night, something changed between them. They did not talk openly about fear. They did not use heavy words. But the music became their language. Doctor visits continued. Some days brought small hope. Others brought quiet worry. The girl began helping more around the house without being asked. She learned how to cook simple meals. She managed small tasks her mother used to handle alone. She never complained. At school, rumors about the upcoming music competition grew louder. Students practiced during breaks. Some even brought small keyboards to rehearse together. She watched from a distance. Part of her wanted to forget about music completely. It felt selfish to think about performances while her mother was struggling. But another part of her understood something important. When she played, her mother smiled. And that smile mattered more than anything. One evening, after a long hospital day, her mother looked especially tired. She sat on the couch, her eyes half closed. "Do you want to rest?" the girl asked. "In a minute," her mother replied softly. Instead of saying anything else, the girl walked to the piano and began to play the melody she had created during that first night of fear. It had grown since then. She had added small changes, gentle rises and falls. Felt like telling a story without words. As the music filled the room, her mother leaned back and closed her eyes fully. The lines of stress on her face softened. Her breathing slowed. For a few minutes, there was no illness, no bills, no fear of the future. There was only music. When the song ended, Her mother opened her eyes, and there were tears in them. "You don't know what that does for me," she said quietly. The girl looked down at her hands. "It's just a song." "No," her mother said firmly. "It's more than that." That night, the girl lay in bed thinking about those words. Maybe music wasn't just a dream for the future. Maybe it was something powerful in the present. She began practicing with a new purpose. Not to impress classmates, not to prove relatives wrong, but to give her mother moments of peace. Each note became intentional. Each practice session felt meaningful. Even when she was tired from school, even when homework piled up, she made time. One afternoon, while waiting outside a clinic room, she tapped her fingers softly against her knee, imagining piano keys. She replayed melodies in her mind. She planned small changes she wanted to try later. Her mother noticed. "You're thinking about music," she said gently. The girl smiled slightly. "Maybe." "Good," her mother replied. "Don't stop." The fear had not disappeared. Still showed up at night. It still whispered questions about what might happen. But now the girl had something to hold on to. She understood that life could change quickly, that nothing was guaranteed, that waiting for the perfect time might mean waiting forever. And slowly, a quiet decision began forming inside her. She didn't know exactly how or when. She didn't know what it would look like. But she knew one thing for sure. One day she would play not just in their small living room, but somewhere bigger. And when she did, she would play for her mother. Not for applause, not for attention, but as a thank you for every early morning, every tired smile, every sacrifice made quietly. The world still did not consider her seriously. They still saw a quiet girl who rarely spoke. But inside her, something strong was growing. Not just talent, courage. The announcement came on an ordinary Monday morning, the kind of morning where nothing feels special. The students were half awake, some still finishing homework before class started. The teacher walked in holding a stack of papers and a small smile. "There will be a community talent evening next month," she said, placing the papers on her desk. "It's open to students and families. Singing, dancing, instruments, poetry, anything meaningful. If you want to participate, write your name on the list outside the office by Friday." The room filled with quiet excitement. A few students immediately turned to each other, whispering ideas. Someone mentioned forming a band. Another talked about preparing a dance routine. She sat still, her heart beating just a little faster. A talent evening. Not a big competition. Not something judged harshly. Just a community event. Still, the idea of writing her name down felt heavy. All day, the thought followed her. During math class. During lunch. Even while walking home. She imagined the stage set up in the community hall. She imagined a simple piano placed under soft lights. She imagined sitting there, her hands resting on the keys. Then she imagined the audience. Whispers. Surprise. Maybe even quiet laughter. "You?" That word had never fully left her. When she reached home, the house was quiet. Her mother had another doctor appointment that afternoon. The silence felt familiar now, but still uncomfortable. She placed her school bag down and walked straight to the piano. Instead of playing immediately, she sat there thinking about the announcement. She tapped one key softly, then another. Could she do it? Her fingers began to move almost on their own. The melody she had created for her mother flowed out gently. It had grown stronger over the past weeks, carried more confidence now. As she played, she imagined the community hall instead of the living room. She imagined the music filling a larger space. The thought scared her, but it also made her chest feel warm. Later that evening, when her mother returned home looking tired but calm, she mentioned the event. "There's a talent evening next month," she said carefully, trying to sound casual. Her mother looked up with interest. "Oh, that sounds nice. It's open to everyone," she continued, avoiding eye contact. "Students and families." Her mother studied her face for a moment. "Are you thinking about joining?" She hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe." Her mother didn't push. She simply said, "If you want to, I'll be there. That sentence stayed with her all night. The next day at school, she walked past the office during break. The sign-up sheet was taped neatly to the wall. Several names were already written in bold, confident handwriting. She stood there longer than she meant to. A group of students approached from behind. They leaned over her shoulder to read the list. "You signing up?" one of them asked casually. She shook her head quickly. "Just looking." They nodded and began discussing their own plans. After a moment, they walked away. Her heart was racing now. She looked at the empty space near the bottom of the page. There was still room. Before she could overthink it, she borrowed a pen from her pocket and wrote her name in small, careful letters. Her hand trembled slightly, but she didn't stop. When she stepped back, her name looked different among the others. Quieter. But it was there. There was no applause. No dramatic moment. Just a simple decision that felt bigger than anything she had done before. The rest of the week passed in a strange blur. Part of her felt proud. Another part felt nervous. What had she just done? Practice at home changed. It was no longer only for her mother. It was for an audience. She began paying attention to small details. Where to pause. When to press softer. When to let the sound grow stronger. She imagined walking onto the stage without rushing. Sitting calmly. Taking a breath before playing. Some days confidence filled her completely. She would play with strength, imagining people listening in silence. Other days doubt returned. What if I forget the notes? What if my hands shake? What if they laugh? One afternoon at school, she overheard two students talking about the event. "I hope it's not boring this year," one said. "Last time, some performances were awkward." They both laughed lightly. Her stomach tightened. Later, during music class, the teacher mentioned the upcoming evening again. "Remember, it's not about being perfect," she said. "It's about sharing something meaningful." Those words felt directed at her, even if they weren't. At home, she started practicing in front of her mother intentionally. Not just casually playing in the background, but asking her to sit and listen from beginning to end. "Tell me honestly," she said one evening, "is it good enough?" Her mother looked at her with soft eyes. "Good enough for what?" "For people," she replied. Her mother smiled gently. "Play." She did. The melody filled the room, steady and emotional. When she finished, her mother didn't clap dramatically. She simply nodded. "It's beautiful," she said, "but don't play it for people." The girl frowned slightly. "Then for who?" "For the reason you started." She understood immediately. She had started playing during fear, during quiet nights, during moments when words were not enough. That honesty was what made the music strong. As the event grew closer, small rehearsals were organized in the school hall. Participants were allowed to test the stage briefly. When her turn came to try the piano on stage, her legs felt heavier than usual. The hall looked larger from the front. Empty chairs stretched out in rows. She sat at the piano bench and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, the silence felt overwhelming. Then she began to play. The sound echoed slightly in the big space. It was different from her living room. Larger, louder. Halfway through, she made a small mistake. Her heart jumped. She almost stopped. But instead, she continued. No one laughed. No one reacted dramatically. A teacher sitting near the back simply nodded encouragingly. When she finished, the hall was still quiet. "Very nice," the teacher said. "Play with confidence. Don't rush." She walked off the stage feeling both relieved and shaken. That evening at home, she told her mother about the mistake. "I almost stopped," she admitted. "But you didn't," her mother replied. That mattered more. The night before the event, she could barely sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the melody in her mind over and over. Her fingers moved slightly against the blanket, practicing invisible keys. She imagined her mother sitting in the audience. She imagined the lights, the silence before the first note. Fear was there, but so was something else. Determination. The next day arrived quietly. The community hall was decorated simply with small lights and folded chairs. Families filled the seats slowly. Laughter mixed with nervous whispers. Backstage, participants waited their turns. Some stretched. Some rehearsed quietly. She stood near the wall, hands clasped together. She could hear the audience murmuring on the other side of the curtain. For a brief moment, she considered leaving. No one would blame her. She could say she felt sick. She could disappear into the crowd. Then she spotted her mother in the front row through a small gap in the curtain. Her mother looked tired, but her eyes were bright. She was there. The host announced the next performer. Her name. Her heart pounded loudly in her ears. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. The lights felt warmer than she expected. The stage seemed larger than during rehearsal. She walked slowly toward the piano, aware of every step. There was a soft murmur in the audience. Some people leaned forward, curious. Others glanced at the program sheet. She sat down, placed her hands on the keys. For one brief second, everything was silent. And in that silence, she remembered why she had signed her name on that paper. Not to prove anyone wrong. Not to be seen. But to play something real. She closed her eyes and began. The first note was softer than she expected. For a split second, she wondered if anyone in the back rows could even hear it. The hall felt too big, the lights too bright. Her hands felt smaller than they ever had at home. But she did not stop. She let the second note follow the first. Then the third. The melody began the way it always had, gentle, careful, almost shy. It sounded like someone telling a secret. A quiet beginning that asked people to lean in and listen. At first, there was still movement in the audience. A chair shifted. Someone whispered. A program paper rustled. Then something changed. As her fingers continued moving, the sound grew steadier. The echo of the hall began to work with her instead of against her. The notes carried further, filling the empty spaces between the rows. The whispering stopped. She kept her eyes on the keys. Not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to stay inside the music. If she looked up too soon, she might remember the crowd. She might remember all the times she had been overlooked. So she focused on the feeling. This was the same melody she had played on nights filled with fear. The same melody that had carried her unspoken worries. The same one that had made her mother close her eyes and breathe a little easier. But tonight it felt stronger. Her hands no longer trembled. They moved with purpose. Each note connected to the next like a story unfolding. The soft beginning slowly grew deeper, fuller. The music rose like a quiet wave, building without rushing. In the third row, a child who had been fidgeting went still. Near the back, someone who had been checking their phone lowered it slowly. Her mother sat in the front, hands folded tightly in her lap. Tears had already begun to gather in her eyes. Halfway through the piece, the melody shifted. It moved from softness into something braver, louder but not harsh, emotional but controlled. It carried weight, the kind of weight that comes from lived moments. She remembered the hospital waiting room. She remembered the unpaid bills. She remembered the nights she played in the dark so no one would see her cry. All of that lived inside the music now. The audience could not see those memories, but they could feel them. There was no showy movement, no dramatic gestures. She simply sat straight at the piano, her face calm, her fingers speaking in ways her voice never had. In the fifth row, a teacher who had once described her as quiet but average leaned forward slightly. His expression changed from polite attention to real focus. Near the side wall, two students who had once laughed softly at her hobby looked at each other, confused at first, then surprised. Is that her? Yes. The melody climbed higher. Not rushed, not forced. Just honest. She pressed the keys with confidence now. She wasn't thinking about mistakes. She wasn't thinking about judgment. She wasn't thinking about being taken seriously. She was thinking about her mother. About the way her mother had stood quietly against the living room wall that first night. About the way she had said, "It felt real, so she let it be real." The strongest part of the piece arrived. The notes filled the hall fully now, wrapping around the audience. It was no longer a quiet secret. It was a clear voice, and still there was no sound from the crowd. No whispers, no movement, only listening. Her heart beat steadily, but not wildly. For the first time in her life, she felt completely seen without having to speak. As the melody began to soften again, she slowed her hands naturally. The music returned to the gentle tone it had started with, like a story coming back home after a long journey. The final notes lingered in the air. She held the last key just a second longer, then lifted her hands. Silence. It lasted only a moment, but it felt long. The kind of silence that carries meaning, not confusion. Then someone in the front row began to clap. It was her mother. The sound was soft at first, just two hands coming together. Then another person joined, and another. Within seconds, the hall filled with applause. Not polite applause, not casual clapping. It was strong, surprised, sincere. People were standing. She looked up slowly, almost unsure if the reaction was real. The bright lights made it hard to see every face clearly, but she could see enough. Open mouths, smiles, wide eyes. She had never seen those expressions directed at her before. Her chest felt warm and light at the same time. She stood up from the piano bench, unsure what to do with her hands. She gave a small, shy bow without thinking. The applause grew louder. Somewhere near the back, someone said, "Wow!" She searched the front row immediately. Her mother was crying openly now, but she was smiling wider than she had in weeks. There was pride in her eyes. Not quiet pride, not hidden pride, clear, shining pride. That was the moment that mattered most. The applause slowly began to fade as the host returned to the stage, still looking impressed. "Thank you," the host said warmly. "That was beautiful." She walked off the stage slowly, her legs slightly weak, not from fear, but from the rush of emotion. Backstage, a few other participants stared at her in surprise. "I didn't know you could play like that," one said honestly. She smiled softly. "I practice." It was the simplest answer, but it carried years inside it. When the event ended, people gathered in small groups, talking excitedly about the performances. Several adults approached her with kind words. "That was very moving. You have real talent. You should continue." Each compliment felt unfamiliar. She accepted them quietly, nodding politely. But she wasn't searching for more praise. She was searching for one person. Her mother made her way through the small crowd slowly. When they finally stood face to face, neither of them spoke right away. Her mother reached out and held her shoulders gently. "That was more than a performance," she said softly. "That was your heart." The girl swallowed, trying to hold back tears. "I played it for you." "I know," her mother replied. They stood there for a moment longer, letting the noise of the hall fade around them. Later that night, back at home, the house felt different. Not bigger, not richer, but brighter. The piano stood in its usual corner, scratched and slightly out of tune as always. But now it felt like more than an old instrument. Felt like proof. Proof that being quiet did not mean being empty. Proof that being overlooked did not mean being ordinary. Proof that something built in silence could still shake a room. She sat down at the piano once more before going to bed. This time, when she placed her hands on the keys, she felt no fear, only gratitude. She began to play the melody again, softer than before. Not for an audience, not for applause, just for home. In another part of town, people were still talking about the girl who had surprised everyone. The quiet one. The one no one had considered seriously. But she was not thinking about them. She was thinking about the way her mother had smiled through tears. And she knew something had shifted forever. Not just in the eyes of others, but inside herself. The morning after the talent evening felt strangely normal. The sun rose the same way it always did. The street outside their house sounded the same. A neighbor swept the sidewalk. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. For a moment, she wondered if the night before had been a dream. But then she walked past the piano in the living room. She paused and ran her fingers lightly across the top of it. It was real. At school, the change was immediate. As she stepped into the classroom, a few heads turned. Not in confusion like before, but in recognition. Someone near the back smiled at her. Another student gave a small nod of respect. "Hey," one girl said during lunch, sliding into the seat across from her. "Your performance. That was amazing." She wasn't used to being approached like that. For a second, she didn't know what to say. "Thank you," she replied softly. "You never told anyone you could play like that," the girl added. She almost laughed at that. "I did," she said gently. "Once." The girl looked confused, then slightly embarrassed, as if remembering something she had forgotten. Teachers noticed too. Her music teacher asked if she had ever thought about formal training. Another teacher mentioned a small scholarship program in the area for young artists. The same people who once described her as quiet and average were now using words like gifted and promising. Felt strange. Part of her was grateful. Another part of her felt calm. Because deep down, she knew something important. She had not changed overnight. The only thing that had changed was that others had finally listened. At home, life continued with its challenges. Doctor visits did not disappear. Bills did not magically vanish. Her mother still had difficult days. Some mornings were heavy with exhaustion. But there was something new between them. Hope. Not loud hope. Not unrealistic hope. Just steady hope. One afternoon, her mother returned from a checkup with better news than expected. The treatment was working slowly. There would still be time needed. Rest. Patience. But there was progress. They sat at the kitchen table together, letting that word settle in the air. Progress. That evening, she played at the piano with lighter hands. Not because everything was perfect, but because things were moving forward. Over the next few weeks, small opportunities began appearing. The organizer of the community event invited her to perform again at another gathering. A local music teacher offered to give her a few free lessons after hearing about her performance. The first time she walked into a proper music room with neatly arranged sheet music and a well-tuned piano, she felt both excited and nervous. The teacher asked her to play something. She chose her melody. As she played, she felt different than she had on stage that night. Calmer, more aware of her technique. She noticed where her hands could improve, where she could press softer, where she could hold longer. When she finished, the teacher nodded thoughtfully. "You have strong emotion in your playing," he said. "That cannot be taught. Technique can be improved. But emotion like that comes from somewhere real." She understood exactly what he meant. Practice became more structured now. She learned about chords, timing, posture. She discovered names for things she had once figured out alone. But she never let go of the feeling that started it all. At school, something else shifted too. She began raising her hand more often. Not just in music class, but in others as well. She realized that being quiet had never meant she had nothing to say. She had simply been waiting for the right moment. Her classmates started including her in conversations more naturally. Not out of pity, not out of sudden popularity, but out of genuine respect. One afternoon, a younger student approached her shyly. "I heard you play," the girl said quietly. "I want to learn too, but I'm not very confident." She saw herself in that moment. "You don't have to be confident to start," she replied gently. "You just have to start." The words surprised even her. They sounded stronger than she felt months ago. At home, the piano no longer felt like a secret corner of the house. It felt like the center of it. Some evenings, her mother would sit nearby with a cup of tea while she practiced exercises. Other times, they would talk between songs. About school. About dreams. About simple things like what to cook for dinner. The illness had not disappeared completely. Some days were still hard. There were moments of worry, moments of waiting, but the music had become a thread holding them steady. One night, after finishing a long practice session, she closed the piano and sat quietly. Her mother looked at her thoughtfully. "You know," her mother said, "that night at the talent evening, I saw something in you I had never seen before." She tilted her head. "What?" "Belief," her mother replied. She thought about that. For years, she had played in the shadows of doubt. Not because she lacked skill, but because she lacked permission from others and from herself. The stage had not given her talent. It had given her permission. Weeks later, she was invited to perform again. This time at a slightly larger community event. The hall was bigger. The audience was unfamiliar. Before stepping onto the stage, she felt the old nerves return. But they didn't control her the way they once did. She took a deep breath. She remembered the living room. She remembered the nights filled with quiet fear. She remembered her mother listening from the doorway, and she stepped forward. This time, she did not play to prove anything. She played because it was part of who she was. The applause came again, warm and genuine. But what mattered most was not the sound of clapping. It was the quiet certainty inside her. Months passed. Her mother grew stronger gradually. Not perfectly, not suddenly, but steadily. They learned to celebrate small improvements. A day without pain. A week with good results. A shared laugh that felt lighter than before. The girl continued studying, continued practicing, continued growing. People no longer introduced her as the quiet one. They introduced her as the pianist. But she knew she was more than that too. She was a daughter who had learned to turn fear into music. She was a student who had learned that silence does not mean weakness. She was proof that being underestimated does not define your limits. One evening, long after the house had settled into sleep, she sat alone at the piano again. She played the melody that had started it all. It sounded different now, stronger, more polished, but still honest. As the final note faded, she realized something simple and powerful. No one had considered her seriously for years. They had seen only what was visible on the surface. But she had been building something quietly all along. And now, she no longer needed anyone's approval to believe in herself. Because she had heard her own voice. Clear, steady, unshaken. And that was only the beginning.